Okay, good evening, everyone. I am Engin. I am the coordinator of the CMP Anthropological Laboratory, and I will talk about the CMP project and the importance of archaeology in anthropological analysis in our case studies. So I would like to thank Ms. Engin for giving me this opportunity to share our experience here with you. So let's start with the general information. My aim for this presentation is to give the overview and general information about the CMP project. We will follow the phases of the project, which are the investigation phase, archaeological phase, anthropological phase, genetic phase, and identification and return of remains phase. Then we will check the importance of archaeology in anthropological analysis with case examples. Okay, general information about CMP. As Professor explained you before, is established in 1981, but the operations start in 2006. Between 1981 to 2006, they are finalizing the missing persons list, and there wasn't any agreement. Still, we don't have an agreement between two communities. So the gates were closed, the borders were closed before. The Turkish Cypriots cannot pass the Greek Cypriot side, and Greek Cypriots cannot pass the Turkish Cypriots side. In 2003, the borders are open, and two sides start to travel all over the island. So after this happened, first in 2005, the emergency excavations start. In 2006, officially CMP project start with the excavations. And in August 2006, the laboratory is open. So our project's aim is to establish the fate of 492 Turkish Cypriot and 1,510 Greek Cypriot missing persons. We want to recover these missing persons and identify it and give the families for proper burial and close this long period of uncertainty. CMP's project is purely humanitarian, so determine the cause of death or the attributed the responsibility of the death is not in our mandate. But as part of our forensic anthropologic analysis, we do record and photograph the perimortem traumas which happened during the death. But we cannot give this information to families in written format. We can just tell them verbally our findings. These are our CMP members. CMP is composed of a member appointed by each of two communities and appointed by the ICRC and the Secretary General of United Nations. Ms. Pülümer Küçük is the Turkish Cypriot member of the CMP appointed by the Turkish Cypriot community. Mr. Paul Henry Arni is the third member appointed by the ICRC and Secretary General of United Nations. And Mr. Leonidas Pantalides is the Greek Cypriot member of CMP who is appointed by the Greek Cypriot community. In CMP, all decisions are taken by consensus and the chair is rotated monthly. This is our bicommunal team which carry out the project all over the island. Over 60 members of the bicommunal team is working on the different phases of the project. And these are our main partners. EAF is established the lab from the beginning, 2006 to 2008. And they are the external consultants till they are coming and evaluate our job. ICRC is the main advisor office for the CMP offices. And we are working with the external genetic laboratories for the DNA identification. So since 2014, we are working with the body. In every 5 years, they are going to beat. And according to the results, we can change the laboratories. Okay, our phases of the projects are the investigation phase, archaeological phase, anthropological phase, genetic phase, and final identification and return of remains phase. First phase is the investigation phase, which aims to collect, analyze, and evaluate information regarding the possible burial sites. First, we need this information about where this body is buried. When we have this information, we can go and exhume these bodies. So this is the first step of our project, and it's very important. And in these days, we have difficulties to finding this good information. So in order to improve the investigation of CMP, an archival research team has been created under the third member office. And it's composed by an international research coordinator and 2 Cypriot researchers with the task of reviewing archival material of international organizations, state actors, and domestic authorities that were present during the events of 1963, 64, and 74. So we are looking more information and accurate information to find these burial places. And sites are visited following the information from the witnesses, which is usually acquired by and managed by investigators of the CMP. But sometimes also the accidental findings can find from the people. They can call us that they found bones when they're doing the garage or the road. Sometimes they found bones and they're calling us. So these are the accidental findings. Okay, second phase, the archaeological phase. Over 30 members of CMP bi-communal team are currently involved in all over the island. So each phase are bi-communal. So archaeological sites, each site we have Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots working together. In the laboratory also Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots working together. Investigation and genetic phase also is the same. Before excavation, firstly, they collect all the information from the investigators. They compare and they analyze. And they start to survey. You can see an example of the survey here. Then archaeologists try to setting the perimeters of the burial site. In contrast to standard archaeology, our work is starting with mechanical work because we are looking for 40, 50 years before. And we have too much loose soil, and we have to be very fast because families doesn't want to wait a lot. So until the first remains appear, our work is continue with mechanically. So the vegetation and the debris is mechanically removed, but when the first remains appear, they continue manually. So we have 7 different archaeological site types in Cyprus. We can find the bodies in open field, in the wells, stream bed, lime kiln, mountain, house yards, cemeteries, churchyards, or archaeological sites. So most of the time we found the bodies in open fields. On many occasions we can find the remains in the wells. We have different wells. On the picture you can see reservoir well, drainage well, dry well, and wheel wells. The wells are open and ready, so you can dump the bodies easily, so they use a lot during these events to hide the bodies. We also found the remains in stream beds and lime kilns. Lime kilns is the place that they were doing the lime for further using. So it's the round shape, and again, like wells, they're ready and open, so we found some remains in the lime kilns as well. Also, we found the remains in mountain. Mountains findings are usually the surface findings because belongs to individuals who left unburied. And these cases is very difficult to identify because some expose the bones and usually they don't give very good DNA. Also, we can find the remains in house yards or houses as well. So the people decide to make the garage in their gardens and they can find the bones. So we need to go and check. This is one of the examples of this, the garden and the place they found all the individual. Also, people try to bury the missing persons close to cemeteries or churchyards, which they have the religional features. So they thought that if they bury it close to them, maybe it will be a proper burial. So this is an example of the burial just next to the cemeteries. Also, we found the remains next to the archaeological sites. This is a body, missing person's body laying just next to the entrance of the cave, which is the ancient burial with the archaeological artifacts. For these cases, we need to call the antiquity departments to come and collect the antiquity artifacts and the bones. And in Cyprus, mainly we have two burial types. We have single burial and we have multiple burials. Single burial means we have a single grave with single body. And the multiple burial is we have one grave and we have multiple individuals in the grave. And also we can recover the remains in articulated or commingled order. Articulated means that you can see some anatomical articulations between the bones. But for commingle, you don't see any anatomical articulations between the bones. They are mixed together. Documentation is very important in Cyprus archaeological phase. Everything first clean, then labeled. You can see the old bones labeled. They take measurements for the drawings and for their reports. Also, each step is photographed and record. And after exhuming, each group is packed in paper bags with unique codes. And all the data is loaded to the central database system, so everyone can access and get the information. Also, all loose soil is sieving. It depends of the condition. The sieving could be water sieving or the dry sieving. If we found the remains in very muddy condition, we use water sieving. If we found them in dry land, we use the dry sieving. And when they're completing the archaeological phase, all remains transferred to the anthropological laboratory with chain of custodies. And this is our bicommunal team of the CMP Anthropological Laboratory. And this is our laboratory, which all anthropological analysis is conducted, and all remains are stored. This is the picture of our storage room. In this storage room, we have different cases, such as cases weighting analysis. There are some cases that we do our analysis, but we send samples for DNA analysis. We are waiting the genetic results. We have some no-match cases. Sometimes we have anthropological analysis. We have genetic results, but we don't have any match with any family of the missing persons. So these cases are no-match cases. So we have to keep these cases until the end. Also, we have some cases that we cannot get any DNA profile and we cannot identify them. We have some failed samples. We have some archaeological cases. Sometimes accidentally they found bones, or sometimes they found bones, but they are very good condition. We are not sure if they are archaeological or not, if you don't have any context. So we need to try the carbon-14 analysis, and we see that they are archaeological. We are keeping all these cases until the end. In anthropological analysis, our first aim is to identify the missing persons. So we try to make the biological profile in order to help the identification. In commingle cases, we try to determine the minimum number of individuals who represent in the grave. Also, in commingle cases, we try to reassociate skeletal elements as much as possible for the families. Also, we try to determine if remains are human or non-human. Also, we try to determine if remains are relevant to CMP project or they are ancient. Also, we analyze the material evidence which found with the remains together. So as I said before, we have two type cases, articulated cases and the commingle cases. Articulated cases are easier than the commingle cases, so we can determine the biological profile, we select samples, and we can identify them easier than commingle cases. For commingle cases, we need to spend more time. First, we need to determine how many individuals represent in this grave. Then we need to separate the individuals as much as possible. Then we select the samples for the identification. Now we start with the cleaning. We clean the bones with tap water. We don't use any chemicals. We don't want to destroy the DNA. Then we try to reconstruct as much as possible. We try to silicone glue to reconstruct. So So you can see this is tibia and the small fragments because of trauma, and we glue, and you can see a complete, and you can see fractures clearly. This is the same skull. This is how we receive, and we reconstruct, and you can see a complete face. It's very important for the families to see the face complete, and it's important for our analysis as well. Okay. Our aim is to determine the biological profile. What does it mean, the biological profile? Biological profile means that we try to find out the information about the individual, such as sex, age, stature, dental findings, or characteristics of the individuation. So the first step of the biological profile is sex estimation. So we try to understand if the individuals are male or the female. So how we are doing this? We are using different methods, morphological variables, and the long bone measurements, metric analysis for sex estimation. So we specially check the cranium and the pelvis, and we are using the long bone measurements for the sex estimation. And when we have the sex of the individual, then we try to determine the age of the individual. So we have different methods for aging. We can use the epiphyseal union closure. We are using the Chypre-Brooks pubic symphysis. We are using Engin method from the ribs. And dental development for the kids is very useful. Also, we use the Lamadin method. It depends of the case. The methods you are using can change. In this picture, you can see different age groups, that baby, kid, teenager, young adult, middle age, old individual. So on this picture, for example, dental development says that this individual is between 3 to 4 years old. And from pubic symphysis, we can say that this is a young individual. And from these ribbons, we can say this is a very old individual. Also, from the long bone measurements, we try to guess the height of the individual. We use Trotter-Glasser method for this. Another important information for us is the dental information, which family members could remember, and we can use this information later for the identifications. For example, on these pictures, you can see some gold teeth, which is unique to the individual, and the family members could recognize this. In Cyprus, we don't have any dental records to compare directly and make the identification, but we can use this information as a supportive evidence for the identification. Also, special pathological conditions or antemortem traumas, which we can see on the bones, is very important for our analysis and for the identification. For example, here, half of that we cannot see, the fractured left arm, and we have a kyphosis, a humpback, that which the pupils can recognize is unique for the individual. This kind of information is very helpful for some cases when you don't have very good DNA samples from the relatives and you need more supportive evidence. You can use this information to identify the people. And also perimortem trauma, which happens during the death. As I said before, in our mandate, we cannot tell the cause of death, but as part of our analysis, we do see and we record them. So we can tell this information to the families verbally. We cannot give them a written report. Usually, we found gunshot wounds and the blunt force traumas on the bones. We also record and photograph the material evidence which were found with the remains, and this evidence is more important for the families and is more meaningful. They don't remember their loved ones as a skeleton, and they cannot recognize them, but these special artifacts they can recognize, and it's very helpful for them to accept the identification later on as well. And also it's very informative for us. For example, you can see a military uniform here that it can tell us that there is a soldier. We see a dress, probably there is a female individual. Sometimes we found the date or name inside the rings, which can help us for the identification. We can use as supportive evidence, these informations. And for the commingle cases, we need to determine the minimum number of individuals. So how we do this? We are checking all skeletal elements one by one, and we are looking for the most repeated elements. So imagine we have these sites, and we don't know how many individuals in there. So we collect all the tibias, femurs, humerus, all the bones, and we count them. And the most repeated element give us the minimum number of the individuals. On this table, we have 35 right and 35 left tibia, which means at least 35 individuals in this graph. But usually on these sites, after DNA analysis, the minimum number could increase. And reassociation. We try to reassociate remains in order to give the families as much as complete skeletons. So our first aim is to identify it, but in the meantime, we try to give them as much as complete. So we try to reassociate different groups together. On this slide, you can see we have 9 different groups. They found in commingle state. And after reassociation, we could manage to identify the complete skeleton. How we do this reassociation? We are using different methods. For example, we are using pair matching methods. If we have one side of the bones, we can find the other side of the bone. We use the reconstruction, and we can see that the small bone fragments from different groups can meet on the same element. We use the articulation. Every individual has a unique articulation surfaces between their bones. That means that my bones cannot articulate with your bones, especially on vertebral column. Articulation is working very well, so we can try to make the whole vertebral column. Also for the secondary burials, which only small bones left, we use DNA associations. For these cases, anthropologically, it's not possible to associate these 3 bones together. One is the arm bone and the other one foot bone, but only DNA results can tell us these 3 bones belongs to the same individual. Documentation also is important for us as well. So we photograph each step we follow. We have different forms that we are filling. Then we put all the data in the centralized database system. And when we completed the identification, we prepare integrated identification report with all disciplines together, and we sign together. And also we translate this report to the families in Turkish or Greek language. At the end of the anthropological analysis, we are selecting DNA samples. So for articulated cases, usually we select 1 sample and 1 reserve sample in case of the first sample didn't work. For the commingle cases, we have to test the element which give us the minimum number of individuals, because we want to identify all, at least the minimum number of the individuals. And also for reassociation purposes, we are testing all long bones or cranium and pelvis as well. And let's move to genetic phase very briefly. We are working with the external genetic laboratory, which is comparing the DNA profiles from skeletal samples and the relatives. And they are deciding on the degree of the match that is compatible with claim relationship between the missing individual and the relatives. Our threshold for the genetic identification is 99.95%. And they are sending us the results in 3 months. And our geneticist is checking these results. Then when we have these DNA results, we are checking DNA reassociations. We are making final inventories. We are using multidisciplinary approach for the identification. So we have identification coordinator. When every phase is finalized their work, and she has the positive match from the genetic laboratory, she called all the parties for the meeting to compare all the information. We have information from the families about the missing individual. We have the information from the investigators about the incident. And we have archaeological findings about the excavation, where it took place, what was the MNI, anthropological findings, if we think it's male and what is the age, specific odontological or pathological conditions. If all these variables are consistent, we can identify the person. Why we are checking all these information? Because you cannot have always the DNA results for the identification. Especially in Cyprus, we have many families missing in the same grave. So if we have brothers or sisters, they don't have their own children, you cannot separate them with DNA. DNA can tell us that they are coming from the same family, but they cannot tell us which is the younger or which is the older brother. But with anthropological analysis, we can tell this, which is the younger, which is the oldest one. Or if one of them broke one of the bones, we can separate those individuals as well. So it's very important. Sometimes the investigative information is very important. If investigator has a very strong evidence that this is group of the 5 individual, but we have only 4 profile, we need to continue to find the 5th individual. In these cases, we usually doing the resubmissions, and we found this 5th individual. Sometimes there is this information and we try, but we couldn't. So for these cases are open cases for us. We need to try to find this individual which we have a strong information. And after identification, we have the family viewing. After identification coordinator is informed the offices, and offices with the psychologists inform the families. And families has the right to come and see the remains, and scientists all there explain how we did this identification. Archaeologists start with the archaeological phase. Anthropologists explain the anthropological phase. Geneticists explain the genetic findings. And if they want, they can go and see the remains and the personal belongings as well. But sometimes you cannot associate each bone to the body or the body part. For the commingle cases, usually we have small bone fragments which is not possible to reassociate anthropologically or genetically left behind. So we inform the families about these remains, and if it's close case, if we have information how many individuals we are looking for, and if you find all these individuals, they can take these remains and they can commonly bury somewhere, or they can share between them. But if we cannot reach the investigator number, so this case is closed, we will never release these remains. So we have to keep, and we have to try to find more individuals in these remains. It's same for the unassociated artifacts as well. The clothing or the artifacts which they are not in direct contact with the remains, they are listed unassociated artifacts, and we show all these artifacts to the families during the family viewing. And if they recognize something, we can give them and they can take and bury it. After the identification and the viewing, the families arrange the burials and we release the remains. We try to release as much as complete bodies, but unfortunately we cannot do it always. You can see some variabilities of our release of remains. So sometimes we have to release only a small bone fragment to the families, which is very difficult for them to accept and the identification or bury them. So in these cases, we explain them that this is what we have now. That's why we identified this fragment, but we always look more, try to find more. But because we don't have any information right now, we have to do this identification. So they have right to wait or bury the remains. So usually they decide to wait if we can find more, but sometimes they can bury only one bone fragments. And here I will talk about our achievements from the beginning to now. Remains of 1,197 individuals have been exhumed from burial sites, and remains of 933 individuals identified and returned to their families. Out of 933, 681 are Greek Cypriots and 252 Turkish Cypriots. Since 2013, approximately 40 scientists from Middle East have been trained by CMP scientists. And CMP Anthropology Laboratory hosts 31 volunteers from different countries. If you interest our volunteer program, you can visit this site and you can find more information. And if you like to come, we are very happy to host you. And here I will talk about our main challenges. Our first challenge is the support to the project. So this project is humanitarian, so we have to keep apart from the politicians. Time is very crucial element for us because as time passes, environment changing, and these situations affects the locating new grave sites. Also, relatives of the missing persons are getting older and passing away. So soon we cannot find any close relatives to give back the remains. Also, solving the complex grave sites and analyzing commingled human remains take more time, which puts another pressure on us because we have to quick as possible to solve these cases. Another challenge is the family's expectation. So this project is based on the family's expectations. Therefore, CMP provides spiritual help for the families, for the psychological difficulties when they are expecting or when we identified and return the remains to them. Also, survival of the project is another challenge because our project depends on the donations. So if these donations is not continue, our project cannot continue. Yearly, we have expenses is €2.5 million. And our main donor is the European Union. Now, the most important part for you, importance of archaeology in our project. So we will see with these different case studies the importance of documentation, importance of context, importance for the reassociation, and importance of the evidence. So the most important thing for the excavation is it can be done once. So when you did it, you cannot any other chance to make it again. So if you don't do something, you miss this forever. So this is the one excavation is the MNI5. We have at least 5 individuals. And according to information, 5 to 6 individuals is buried in this area. And the excavation is start 3rd of March and it's end 19th of March. So we start with 8th of March that there is no remains yet. And next day, we start to unearthing some remains. You can see one complete and one incomplete bodies here. When we move to 10th of March, this is the 3rd day. You can see that we have one bodies here and the one partial here. And on the same day, the first one is packed and only label remained. And you can see the second one. When we move to 12th of March, you can see only labels for the other previous bodies. And you can see the 4th and 3rd body here. When we move to 16th of March, we have labels and the last body here. And when we move to 17th of March, we have 4 remains labels. We don't have any remains, only we can see the labels. And the last body here. And when we move to 18th of March, we have only labels. We don't see any bodies here, so it can be only done once. But on these cases, documentation and photographs is very important. If we don't have these photographs, we will never have information about how these bodies were found. If you have some mixture of the bones here, you can be sure now that these bones could belong this body or that body, but it cannot belong this one or that one. But if you don't have this record and the photographs, you can never be sure, and you have to check all of them one by one, which is time consuming, and it makes your job very hard. Second importance is for the context. So this is a single burial of one complete body. On this case, the position of the body and the position of the arms and the ceramics found with the bodies and the grave is located very close to a church. It's evident that this is a case of a medieval burial. It's not related to our project, so we don't have to exhume this body. So we just closed and left it there. But if you don't look at all the evidence together, and if you cannot make your comments, you have to exhume this, then you will analyze, then you have to send to carbon-14 to be sure. But the context is telling you all this, so you don't have to spend your time and your money to tell this truth. Study commingled remains is very time-consuming for the anthropologist. And for these cases, it's very important the archaeological information. For example, if you don't have any archaeological information now, we have commingled remains on the table, so we need to record them and we try to reassociate them. So for these small bone fragments, which we cannot reconstruct or associate, we have to left them behind. So we can tell that this leg and this leg are paired, and we can tell maybe these vertebrae has the articulation between them, but our work is very limited if we don't have any archaeological information. But in this case, if we have these photographs and the archaeological report says that this is a disturbed burial of one individual, and anthropologically we also check and we sure that all bones belongs to one individual, we can associate all the small bones as well to the body, and we can give to the families because we have evidence that there was only one individual. And study of the mass graves is another big challenge for us, and the anthropological analysis is very linked to the archaeological analysis. If the archaeologists working very well and they have record everything very good, this will help us a lot, and we can associate the bones easier. For example, this is the non-scientific recoveries, and this is how we feel about that. So you can see that the people just collect the bones and they group them. And these kind of cases are nightmare for the anthropologists because you have very, very limited information. So if you have this case, you can just put them on the table. You can write which bone is present, which bone is absent. You can try to do pair matching, but that's it. But if you have more information from the field, these bones is related with these hip bones, and there's another upper bone here. You can see very good drawings. Also, they can mention in their reports that these two body groups could related. We can check them closely. And in the lab, okay, we can check. They told us this group could related with this group. This vertebra is articulate with this one. Yes, no, so we can make a complete skeleton. Why it is important to make a complete skeleton? Because if you associate more bones, you will have more information. Only pair of femur can give you maybe only sex or limited age, but if you have whole skeleton, you can talk about more about the individual. And especially for these no match cases that we cannot any match between the bone samples with the family reference samples, we can give the hypothesis to the investigators to look on. So we can tell that we have a male individual. He is 19 to 30 years old and he had broken his arm, so he can just focus on this group instead of look whole group. Also, the artifacts is very important, and circumstantial evidence is very important for us. So sometimes we have dates inside the ring, 1973, or on the banknote 1972. on these two cases that we can be sure that this is the incident not happened in 1963-64, so it should be 1974 case. Also, the artifacts found with the remains can tell us some information. So when we have these kitchen utilities, we can tell that, okay, these individuals probably, they were living there, there was a camp, they were eating there, where they killed. And the evidence is very important. On these two pictures, you can see that the remains were completely removed from the last level. And after the cleaning, you can see very clearly the teeth of the machine on the surface. And this is very important evidence for us that they make this grave with this machine. So you can focus on this group. If the archaeologists didn't do their job very well, maybe you can never have this information. So as CMP, we are still working on to solve the cases. And as much as the project is functional, we try to find more individuals. So this is end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. So please feel free to ask any questions.